jurisdiction is over. I do want to point out that the chair is right when he says the council may very well want to pull people back in, have hearings, discuss what's going on here, how is this working, and so the council retains the ability to have those hearings and ask questions afterwards. But once there's a valid consistency determination, I think that consistency determination stands. Our attorneys may overrule us, but I don't think so.
I'd like to offer, in the interest of time, we could go on with what ifs all day long. I think we've addressed the tweaks that we want to make into the policy. I'd like to recommend that we adopt those, recommend those to staff. When the sixth draft is published, let's ask those of you who have expressed concerns about specifics to come back to staff and noodle through the sixth draft, and if there's any additional changes that need to be made, help work up the recommendation. But for now, we got a lot more furrows to plow today, and I'd like to move on.
Yeah, and
spoken like a real farmer.
Well, I'd also like, Joe said something earlier, which was a great idea, which is to give some examples in some form. Doesn't have to be in here, but that it's a common practice in government agencies to write guidelines that sort of say how to interpret, where you can take the extreme examples and say, no, we don't mean that, and then give some simple comfort ones. And all we want to reserve, I think, is the right to call somebody in if something egregious is happening. Like if something's changed that clearly makes something inconsistent with our plan in a significant way, we want to be able to highlight it. And that's going to be, I hope, a rare set of occurrences.
Joe, you're going to be the one redrafting this. What do you understand that we've agreed on?
Staff, Dan in this case, will probably...
Dan, what do you agree that we've agreed on?
Well, what I've heard clearly is that there's not a lot of interest in retaining the at all times language. They got to comply with the laws that are applicable at the time of the certification. It doesn't feel to me, it seems like also the council's not interested in having people certify they're going to be in compliance with the labor law or the safety law or the requirements regarding prevailing wage or all the other laws that are applicable to a project that might not be relevant to the Delta plan. So it feels to me like the focus on laws that pertain to water resources and biological resources and flood risk and land use is the right way. Is the way you want us to go. I haven't heard you clearly express a point of view about whether there's a difference in the obligation that a certifying agency would have if it's only funding or approving a project as opposed to carrying it out. And so I think in that case, we have a recommendation, and I haven't really heard any direction that says, no, don't do that. There's some discussion about it, but I think I haven't heard a clear direction on that.
So we're pretty close to option 4?
I think what I'm hearing is it's option 1 is revised with option 4, so it just complies with, instead of the complies with, and will continue to comply at all times.
I guess I heard option 2, where we also asked the project proponent to provide.
See, I'm hearing option 3 as revised by option 4.
Not for me. I mean, I just think we want to make it easier for the agency. It gives you more caveats if you go with 1 or 2, that the agency's not signing something blindly. I would defer on you explained why. 2 was appealing to me. You explained why you thought it'd be almost impossible.
Yeah.
So I would defer to you, your judgment.
Then we will simplify 1 and improve the language and take out the implication that it's always into the future. And I think that's what I understand. And I think that does that limits the agency's responsibility more than option 3 does. So it's really more like 1 as modified by 4.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the confusion.
It's hard. I mean, it's also, I just think about it, the future. You just want some, I don't want to make it overly complicated, but there's something I guess we can always use the bully pulpit if somebody goes out of compliance 3 days later and it was obviously a charade. People have done that. I've seen that.
They have.
So, you don't want that.
Yeah, see if that flies. Take off all references to future.
Right.
Second.
I'm saying there have been times. This comes from all of us having, some of us having too much local government experience. There are times when people will go through a charade to be in compliance for one day, and then the next day they're out. You don't want to give up any tools on that one.
Well, then we delay the approval.
We've already approved it, then they go out. It happens.
I think that's one of those rare occasions. I hope it's one of those rare occasions that we shouldn't provide the law for.
I'm confident Dan can write us
Let's see how good Dan is.
an option that then we can revisit. One option, not four.
That's why you're getting those big bucks, Dan.
Thank you.
And then with this big screen, if you could diagram it, because it's going to have a lot of dependent clauses.
Okay, anything else on this one? Okay, members go to page 15. We've advanced one page. This is Delta Flow Objectives. Now, we have spent, I cannot remember how many hours on this one. Mr. Grindstaff?
Yes, in the fifth staff draft, and we have spent many hours on this. Maybe I should do a brief history. We had something like the draft that's in the fifth staff draft early on in the third draft. In the fourth draft, we actually split the policy part, which is that we would determine consistency with the Delta plan based on existing standards and those standards as they are updated. And then we had a recommendation that the state board develop new flow standards as they moved ahead. We got direction after we had that we should recombine those two policies together, or the policy and the recommendation together into one policy. We also had direction that we should say what the actions were that the council might take in the event that the state board was unable or unwilling to meet the timeline that we put into the law. We have had numerous comments by people that feel that it's inappropriate for us to make empty threats. I'll use their language. And staff's view, after reviewing all of that, is not that it's empty threats, but that actually the council should have a consistent policy with regard to recommendations that we make to other agencies and deadlines that are set that actually says when and if it appears a deadline won't be met, the council will actually consider that and meet with that agency and bring them here to the council and make a decision at that time what to do, so that we actually have a standard way of dealing with that. And if we actually have that standard way of dealing with that, then that would be an appropriate thing to do with flow standards, just as it's appropriate to do that with the flood board on their flood plan, or it might be appropriate to deal with TMDLs if the regional board can't make appropriate progress. And there are any number of things in the Delta plan that actually have timelines associated with it, and as part of the responsibility, the council should, at the time it becomes apparent that those won't be met, the council meets with those appropriate agencies and makes a decision at that time what to do. Therefore, we're recommending option one, which is removing that language about what the council might do. We made a couple of minor tweaks in the language, but fundamentally it's the same language about we are going to use the existing water quality control plan objectives for consistency determinations, and we recommend that the state board develop new standards and implement those standards on the timeline here. We have checked with the state board numerous times about these dates. They acknowledge that they're difficult, but they ask that we leave the dates in here. The other thing I should point out, this doesn't show the asterisk, but there was an important asterisk that we had on this policy in the fifth draft that I assume would stay, that said that if you actually have to go through a water rights process in order to impose the standard, that would probably take much longer, and that our recommendation is that they attempt to negotiate an agreement that actually implements the flow standard. So that asterisk would remain with the staff recommendation.
Randy.
Joe, there are still two things that are missing. One, the state board's activity is going to be focused on water quality objectives. And to single out flow is a departure from the conversation that we had for 2 hours yesterday, and is a departure from the letter that we're going to be sending to them, encouraging them to consider all of the factors that are within their purview to address ecosystem health in the Delta.
Well, and we address all of those other factors in the plan, so we have a number of things in the plan that talk about each one of those other things. So we talk about TMDLs and toxic substances. We talk about dealing with invasive species. We talk about management of fisheries and genetics and dealing with hatchery issues.
Right.
So we have all of that whole range of things. So the chapter that this is in the whole context is there are a number of problems, and we have policies and recommendations dealing with each one of those. And so rather than have one gigantic policy that said do all of these things, we have it in. We've split them that way. So
I understand that, but in the context of what we're asking them to do, they're not going to do just flow standards in isolation. It's going to be part of a water quality standard proceedings. Mm-hmm. I think we need to call that out, and I think we need to cross-pollinate the plan in terms of the environmental chapter and the water supply chapter, and just highlight in one sentence that this is part of a comprehensive set of solutions, and within their purview they have a number of issues, including flow, that we're asking them to look at and complete by these dates.
I agree with that. Actually, if you look at the context of this policy, it tries to do that. And I think that's what you're asking for, that we actually have the policy set in the right context. So hopefully when we do the...
Or is Randy trying to make it as explicit as possible in this chapter?
Yeah, and Hank, we had a lengthy conversation yesterday, heated at times, about what it is that this council is asking or recommending to the state board that they do or not do. And I think we just need to be consistent with the letter we're going to write and the policy that's included in the Delta Plan.
Felicia.
Question. I don't totally get the option 1, option...
Nobody can hear you.
Oh, I don't really get the option 1, option 2. Can you explain your thinking? I mean, there are a couple of words that are different, but if you take option 2, there are just a couple things that are different from option 1, which is what I think I heard you saying. And is option 1 you're saying just
option
drop
1
what we might do?
Yes.
Say what we might do? Okay, then let me think about it, because I'm actually not sure what I think about it. I do think that a number of folks on all sides of this have asked us to put the pressure on the water board to do something very hard. I'm glad you're acknowledging in an asterisk that if they have to go through a whole water rights proceeding, there's no way they can meet this, but we're encouraging them to do everything they can to do it because so much is dependent upon it, and it's a hard thing to do. So the water board over time has a history of not being able to do this absent some sort of intervention, whether it's EPA coming in and doing it for them so that people want them to do it, so EPA will go away. That's a time-honored thing, but it takes a lot of time, or whatever. And so the question is, how do you keep the pressure on to make it a little easier for them, particularly if they have to make a deal? People need some kind of time deadline. What I heard from people is, I look at this, it's sort of like the kerfuffle over the word consider. Yesterday, where all we said was consider. We didn't say what to do or even that we were recommending anything. And people went a little bonkers. And then here we're just saying, here's what we might do, because we're trying to say, this is important. And again, this goes back to my governance issues. A big part of why we were created was that the plethora of other state agencies were working not in concert and were not taking action. So, California water is stunningly unconnected and slow. I mean, this is for people in the environmental world outside of California, it's a mystery considering how advanced California is on other issues. And so we're asked to keep the pressure on. So to me, it seems sort of modest for us to say, here are some of the things we might consider. If there's, again, some clarifying language in a side thing or a colloquy or whatever we do so that we're not saying that this is going to immediately happen, but that we might consider, and it depends on how reasonable it is. If the state board totally falls down on the job, then we do have to consider doing something ourselves. But that's not going to be our first, second, or third choice. So illuminate the changes in words like implement versus develop. Here it was adopt and implement flow objectives. Right. Which seems like we're asking them to do more in a shorter time. So I don't understand what you had in mind.
Well, adopt and implement is the same from the fifth draft to now, and those are words.
All right. Well, then the paragraph over here in the existing looks different.
But then what we based the fundamental change is removing the language that says if the board isn't going to do it, then we might consider doing these other things. And
You made one other change,
Joe. You made a word change. That
in policy 1, sub B, you added the qualifier as soon as reasonably possible. Now that's
actually
new.
is language that came from the state board.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, comparing. You say, look, the problem is we ought to. So the next time you do a matrix, can I just make a request? When you've got the fifth draft on one side and the proposed sixth draft ideas, highlight the additional language and modification so we don't have to go word by word through both to figure it out ourselves.
So what the difference is in the fifth draft we said develop flow criteria for high priority tributaries.
Yeah.
Flow criteria are not standards that are enforceable. So the change here is to say adopt and then as soon as reasonably possible implement, which means make them
by the same date adopt, but then as soon as
reasonably possible implement those flow objectives for the high priority tributaries. So it's not saying you're going to get all of these things implemented by June of 2018, but it is saying as you can, when it's reasonably possible, implement those standards. It's not just enough to have the objectives developed.
I get what you mean. I just didn't
so
get the
I thought that was
modifier.
Basically a clarification, not really a significant change, because clearly if you're developing the objectives the way the law says, the intent is that you use that to then move forward to implement those.
Randy.
And as a practical matter, the implementation will be determined either via a negotiated settlement or agreement among tributary operators or a water rights proceedings. And the recent history has been, in examples like the Yuba Accord, that they fall short of the water rights hearing because it is determined by those that are affected on the tributaries to reach an agreement outside of a water rights proceedings. But there's no way to predict how long that would take. And so I think it's unnecessary to offer any threats to do things that we don't have any authority to do. And I would rather, monitor the dates, and when the time comes, if nothing has happened, then reconvene and discuss it. I certainly, as a council member here, we've not met our deadline. I wouldn't want somebody coming in and usurping our authority to do whatever they think they need to do because we haven't met our deadline. And we've had our gym shorts and track shoes on from day one trying to sprint to the finish line. So I would not be in favor of any threats.
I would agree with that completely, but I would add in there the measurement, that once they're implemented, they should be measured to see what the actual flow rates are.
That's interesting. Question. There's
Felicia.
two pieces to that. One is what kind of things whether we would illustrate what we might do or not, which is sort of what I'm hearing Randy say, he'd rather not and wait till the time. Or you could, add words that are sort of within reason, because obviously we're checking in. And so the question is, I don't have a set thing in mind, though I could think about it. I think we should lay out something. Doesn't necessarily have to be this. Some illustrative things that we could do that are within our power. That's a good caveat. But we should also modify it to say that we wouldn't do it willy-nilly. But I think there needs to be something that helps give people that incentive to come to that agreement.
Could you be vague and say, in the absence of the implementation of flow rate requirements, certain projects may not be approvable?
Yeah, you could. Look, this is important not for the regulatory part of the Delta plan we're proposing. We already know the regulatory portion is only going to be, we'll apply the Water Board standards as that currently exist, and we'll apply the new one when they adopt them. That's we already said that repeatedly. The rest of it is the narrative and discussion and the seriousness with which we approach it. And we are being challenged by the interest groups, all of whom want us to give them tactical advantage on the fight over the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, one way or the other. That's my personal opinion. So those who object to any new Delta facility want the facility studies to be stopped until flow standards have been set, which they hope and expect will be extraordinarily high, making the facility impossible. The proponents of the facilities want standards to be delayed until after they cut their deal on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, for fear that the Water Board might actually say, as they have 5, 6 times since 1960, when they started this, that some more water for the Delta might be needed to help protect the ecosystem. And it is, to me, if we provide any value to this process, we should not fall into the trap of serving the tactical interests of the competing parties. Your point, Hank, is a good one. The best way to express this would be, the standards should be adopted, whatever they're going to be. We're not recommending what they are. Higher, lower, even the same. We leave that open, which irritates some people. And you'd say, well, gosh, guess the Bay Delta Conservation Plan ought to be delayed until the standards are adopted. After all, the Water Board, by the way, has to approve the intake points of a new Delta facility. And that gets us lost in what is the endless old 50-year battle between interests of my projects going first. Thus, on page 17, the absolute delicious summary statement from the state and federal water contracts that stopping all progress simply because progress is lacking on one front is bad public policy, which is their statement. My stuff is really important. This other stuff can be done later. I understand time deadlines are extended. BDCPs, it's 7 years now it's been going on. And the chance of them completing the ambitious timetable this year is problematic. Now, they might. And we've said specifically on BDCP, we want the process completed by a date in 2014. We said that specifically. And we've said specifically we want the water quality standards completed around the water standards because they match up. That's the part of the co-equal goals. The illustrations of what might happen if politics derails common sense, that is, God, maybe you can't grant water right permits and all the other stuff. That's what we're talking about. That's the argument from the interest groups. You can't say that. I don't like that. You can't say it. We're not proposing it as a regulation. We're proposing as a statement of clarity. The National Academy report is useful in reminding us that obscuring the issues and hiding the ball compounds the problems of trying to manage a complex water and ecosystem situation. And they call for some fairly common sense language, and I would too. As you might imagine, I'm in favor of saying just what I've just said. I suspect the council might not be. That's okay. But don't treat this as simply language that is unrelated to big things. This is part of the fundamental deal that's part of the co-equal goals and the reason we got created.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we make a threat, because I don't think any hollow threat is worth anything at all. But saying that in the absence of something else, it may imperil the approval of something that would depend on flow criteria.
Let me make a suggestion. What I suggest is that we actually have some language here that says by June 30th, the council will request an update from the state board on items on the flow standards. And if the items cannot be, if the dates cannot be met, the council will consider and may amend the Delta plan to achieve progress on the co-equal goals in place of the updated flow objectives. If we just say that and end it there without going into the specifics, I think that is a way of saying, yes, we're serious, we're going to follow up on this, but we aren't going to say things that inflame the situation, although the council might at some point do those things. But
So are you saying in the absence of instead of in place of? In your sentence there.
Which page you're looking at?
The one you were just quoting from,
15.
page 15, the last paragraph, and by June 13th.
And what I would
Council will
do is
consider and may amend the Delta plan to achieve progress on the co-equal goals in the absence of updated flow criteria.
in the
implementation.
absences.
Felicia, then Randy?
Just a clarifying point, there are flow objectives.
Yes.
There are flow
Talking about
objectives in
implementation.
existence today. There are flow objectives that will be updated between now and then based on FERC proceedings and the Merced, the Tuolumne, perhaps by then the Yuba. So we're not operating without standards. So
He says updated.
right.
Can you be more specific than that, Joe?
Well, they're
What?
going to be taking a look at the entire system and evaluating if there are any changes necessary to meet the co-equal goals, and that's what we're encouraging them to do. It's I think science has indicated that this is an appropriate thing to do. I would just point out that the most recent flow water quality studies that were done on the Feather River for the Oroville relicensing, it took about 4 years of annual extensions before they finally agreed to the new flow criteria, and the increase was minimal. Mm-hmm. And it had everything to do with the temperature in the Thermalito forebay for rice production. So there is no guarantee that the review of the standards is going to increase in some large increase in the tributary inflow requirements. So I just offer that as a caution that we not need to get too concerned about whether the state board is able to do this in the prescribed amount of time or if it takes a year longer. It's a very if they're going to do a comprehensive job, as we're asking them to do, it's going to take time to do well. And I think it's entirely appropriate that when the dates come, we review it. But I would not be supportive of restricting other projects and holding them hostage, which may be very beneficial to achieving the co-equal goals because of the time delay in the state board proceedings.
Are the current standards being met?
Yes. And they're reviewed regularly. If there's a violation, they're flagged and dealt with. But I think in my experience is water operators take almost a biblical view of the flow requirements that they are required to meet in in-stream flows.
What does that mean?
That means that they monitor that by the minute.
Religiously.
Religiously.
And they do.
Yeah, there's scoff laws. There are always scoff laws. but I wouldn't say it's always enforced because the water board doesn't have anywhere near the enforcement staff they should. We tried in the legislation to get them more staff, and they haven't been hired because of the budget thing. So I wouldn't make any statements about whether it is or it isn't.
Not
But
the Old Testament, Moses. And
Pat?
Not crossing.
Pat?
No, I was just explaining, it's
that's
not
right.
the
I'm
book
doing
of
the Old
Exodus.
Testament.
It's not the book of Exodus he was referring to, or the Red Sea and
Parting.
Right.
all or nothing.
You know, we hadn't thought about calling that in. That's an idea. One of the thoughts in this, too, is I thought in the contractor's letter, they took out the punitive pieces and said we might consider how we could help them and provide incentives. So I think the notion of checking in with them, and probably more often than we're saying, but we don't have to say it, seeing how we could help, too, is good, because we're supposed to be looking at the overall interest of the state of California. So a more even-handed, you know, we're going to be on this and see either how we can help or leverage help, or provide some sort of sticks. We wouldn't say it that way, but I'm not averse to thinking about other things we might do. I'm not wedded to this, because I think Randy's right. It's been a distraction. I'm a little nervous about taking it out. I mean, I would like to at least say that we'll consider a variety of measures either to help them or to goose them. Although
Joe,
that would not be the term of
Pat.
our review.
We're proposing our review, almost a little more than a year from now, 2013. But that's for both jobs that the board has to do, which is the delta flow objectives and then the tributaries, which are not due in our recommendation till 2018.
And that goes to Ms. Marcus's point. We will, in fact, we have already been having them come and appear before the council.
Right.
And my assumption is that we won't just do it at this point, but that we will continue to have them appear on a regular basis, updating us on the progress that they're making.
Don?
Yeah, well,
Oh, I'm sorry.
So specifying the things that we could do or taking them out, as your later suggestion was, taking them out would be recognizing that at least the 2018 standards, we wouldn't know enough in 2013, right? To know whether they wouldn't know enough.
Probably not.
Okay. And to the issue of what BDCP has to prove to the state board, does it relate to just job one, the delta flow standards, or does it relate to the tributaries as well?
Well, it's primarily the delta flow standards, but BDCP, one of the things that people get all caught up in is the thought that what the state board does now is going to be the final word on standards for BDCP. What is likely to happen is that the standards that they do now will actually be the key standards for the next 15 years while BDCP is going through the process and being implemented. It is almost a certainty that there will be yet another review, because the state board is required to review these standards on a regular basis, another review of standards before BDCP is ever implemented, and that those new standards would actually be what applies to BDCP. And I have had this discussion with many parties, and I think the more sophisticated parties understand, with all of the agreements that everybody thinks they make today, circumstances may change, and the way the state board does regulations will have to change with the circumstances. And for us to assume that the things that they do in the next couple of years will in fact be in place in 2025 or 2030 is just wrong.
Don, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would just say I appreciated the chair's kind of description and characterization of, I think, some of the activity around the discussion on this. But I would, I think, with Joe's outline, concur that I don't know it's necessary to specify all the things that you might or might not do to either push and or assist. But I think that as Felicia has characterized it, that if we were going to go with something along the lines of what Joe suggested and take out the bulleted points down below, I think that the consideration, because our role, the role of this council, could be one that beyond just considering how we might hammer away at it, that there may be some other things we can do. And I know we've been have been certainly urged by some to take a role, not necessarily in a punitive way, but to bring folks together into for whatever leverage we have to try to assure that folks are talking to one another and that carrying out their responsibilities, but in a way that has, as we heard yesterday, maybe that little broader look. And so I would be supportive of as Joe suggested, but maybe to characterize this so that we may have some hammers, but you may have some tools that can assist to do this, but not necessarily have to spell them out, because I think it's going to be up to the council a year from now or 2 years from now. If those things are in the tool chest, whether they're in a plan or not, I assume that you can pick those up and utilize them. And I think that, as the chair has pointed out, this is going to be an ongoing effort. So,